Okay, so this is just a review lesson while we do our practice quiz for 4.4. Remember, we're going to graph in linear equations in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form looks like y equals mx plus b. So our m, remember, we said is our slope. That tells us on a graph how much to rise or run. And then our b, the sign in front of it, whether it's plus or minus, that tells us this is our y-intercept. I abbreviated there. And that tells us where to put our first point on the y-axis. So let's look at, we need to make sure, first of all, when we're given a linear equation, is it in slope-intercept form? So I'm looking at this, y equals mx, and then I have the plus b or minus b, so I know that that's in slope-intercept form. So right away, I'm going to circle where my slope is. That says 3 over 2. Our slope is always right next to the x. It doesn't include the x, it's just right next to the x. So our slope is called the m variable, so I rewrite that. This is my slope, 3 over 2. I'm going to use that later to rise and run. So then to find my b, remember for this section, our b is where it's the number out by itself with the sign in front of it. So that would mean this is a -2. That is our b. When we write our b for this section, we put it as an ordered pair because we're going to graph it. It's always 0, comma, whatever the number is. So this number happens to be -2 or -2. There is our ordered pair for b. Now, from there, how do I graph this after I picked out my slope and then after I picked out my b? So the first thing I do is I plot this point. Okay, if you have your practice quiz, you should be copying this down. I know I do go fast on the videos because I'm only allowed so much time, so pause whenever you need. So I start with plotting the point 0, -2, which means I go over 0 and then -2, so I go over and then down 2 because it's -2. There's my first point. I plotted my y-intercept, meaning it's on the y-axis, which is the up and down line. Oops, sorry about that. So from this point, I am going to use my slope to rise and run. So the top number tells me how much to go up or down. If it's positive, I go up. If it's negative, I go down. The bottom number tells me how much I go right. We're always going to keep the bottom number positive, so this means we are always going to go right. So for this one, just taking little notes on the side, I know I'm going to go up 3 because it's positive, and I'm going to go right 2 because it's positive. So from the first point that I plotted down here, right here on this is my y-intercept. This is the 0, -2. I'm going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 2, and then put my second point. So I used my slope. I went up 3, 1, 2, 3, and I went over 2, and I put my second point. You don't have to draw those lines in there. I was just showing you how I use the slope. And then all I need to do from there is connect these, trying to make a straight line. That is graphing a linear equation in slope-intercept form. So these are all done the same as long as we have them in the correct form. Let's look at number 2 as an example. Again, I can see y equals mx and then plus or minus b. I can tell right away this is in the correct format, so I'm good to go. I can now start picking out the information I need. I need my slope. My slope is always next to the x. So for this section, if you're given a whole number as a slope, we need to make it a fraction. So if my slope is 4, to make that a fraction, we just put the whole number over 1. The reason we're doing this is we need this for counting our slope rise over run when we graph. The next part, again, we're going to look at the number out by itself back here. That is my B. We write our B as an ordered pair, 0, comma, whatever that number is. Out there is a -3, so that is my y-intercept. And y-intercept just means here's my y-axis, right? It's the up and down line. That's the y-axis. And that's just where my line hits the y-axis. So that's why I put the point there. So I'm going to go ahead and go over 0. This is how I graph an ordered pair. Over 0 and down 3. 1, 2, 3. I have to count because not all the numbers are on here, but we're just counting to 3, so it's okay. So I go down 3 at -3. So that's my first point. I always start here. I plot first point. Sorry, I'm not the nicest writer on this smartboard. Second step. Now I use rise over run. I start at my point that I just plotted right here, and I go to my slope. I know I'm going to go up 4 because it's a +4, and then I'm going to go over to the right 1 because it's rise over run. I always put the arrows in just to help me, so you have to do both those moves. So from here, I'm going to count up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. So again, I'll show you with the marker. 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. That's how I counted it, although you don't put those marks in. I just want the ordered pair, or the 2 points. And then I connect them as a line with arrows. I've just graphed my linear equation. So that's slope-intercept 4. So number 3, this one's a little bit different, but on your quiz, you're going to get one like this too, because we're going back to what we've already learned in chapter 1 is if an equation is not in the correct format, we can rearrange it. So this one, it says y plus 1/2 x equals 2. It's not in the y equals mx plus or minus b. It's not in that format. So what I need to do is get the y all by itself. So I'm going to take this whole thing right here, this plus 1/2 x. The reason why I'm taking that is because I want the y to be by itself. So I'm going to take this whole thing to the other side, and then I'm either going to add or subtract it based on what sign is in front of it. I always do the opposite. This says plus 1/2 x, so to get rid of it, I do minus 1/2 x. I do the whole thing. I like to draw my line in minus 1/2 x. On the side where the y is at, remember this will cancel out. And then I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to try to rewrite it a little smaller up here. I'm going to rewrite it in slope-intercept form because now I'm left with just my y on the one side. This all canceled out. So I'm left with just y, and then on this side, these cannot be combined because they're not like terms. So I'm going to rearrange them so that they say something x, and then plus or minus my b. So my m and my b are already there. So I know that it's -1/2 x because that's there, and then I have a 2. So it's a plus 2 because it's a +2. So one extra step here. I had to rewrite this equation in slope-intercept form in order to find my m and my b. Now I can find my m and b in graph. So again, next to my x is my slope. If it's a negative, I want the negative on the top number always. So it's -1/2. We know that's my m because that's in the position. My b is over here, so we know it's 0, something. The b is a +2, so we know it's 0, 2. We want it to be a +2. So from here, again, the same thing with the first two. I start by plotting my first point. Okay, at 0, 2. So I go over 0 and then up 2, which would be right here. I'll erase that. That was just where I started. So this is 0, 2. This is the ordered pair 0, 2. From here, I'm going to use my slope, -1 over 2. The -1 actually means when I do rise over run, we actually fall. Rise can mean up or down. If it's negative, I go down. But again, we always go right for the bottom number. So from here, I'm going to go down 1 and over 2. And I put my next point. And I'll show you how I counted that out, but again, you don't put these in. I went down 1 and then over 2, and then I put my other point. That's how I used my slope, but again, we only need the points where they're at. And then I just connect them with a ruler or a side of a paper, something like that. All right, and then number 4 looks a little bit different, but we talked about this previously. If it's in y equals mx form, that's okay, because what that means is if there's no extra number, that means our b is actually 0, 0. So it's like having a plus 0, but we don't write plus 0. So we don't write it, but we should know if there's no b in the equation, the ordered pair for b is 0, 0. So this actually is 0, 0. We just should know that. We don't write plus 0 because it doesn't make sense to add 0. It's just extra writing, so we don't do that in math. But I can find my m. It's right there next to the x. And remember, if my m is a whole number, I have to make it a fraction, which just means I put it over 1. That's going to help me when I go to graph. So again, just like the other ones we did, we put our first point here. 0, 0, which is right in the middle. That's nice and easy. That's the origin. And then I use my slope. If it's -2, I go down 2. And again, we always go right as our second move and then plot the point. So from this 0, 0, I'm going to go down 2. I counted down 2 and over to the right once. I'll show you that with my marker. I went down 2 and over 1. So from there, I just draw my line in, and I have graphed my... So my special cases are like this. When I have an x equals, that means I go to my x-axis, and I put a point on -1. So my x-axis is here, this way, right? It's labeled. Here's my x-axis. And I just go over to -1, which would be this way. This is +1, so I want to be at -1. I put my point there, and then when it says x equals, you need to remember this. We draw a vertical line. What this means is, that's why it's called a special case. Our slope is actually undefined. We can't figure out the slope, and there is no b. So we would write none. It's a special case. You kind of got to memorize it or use your notes for it. Same with the next one. If you see a y equals, and be careful, make sure you're reading it correctly. A y equals means you go to your y-axis and you put a point on the number, whatever number it says. So my y-axis is the up and down one. And I put my point right on there. It says +3, so I'm going to count up 3. 1, 2, 3. And this one is actually a horizontal line, which means it goes across. Our slope then equals 0. Remember when you have a horizontal line? And you already know your b, it tells you at the top. If your y equals 3, your b is 0, 3. So you should use this when you go to take your actual quiz. Practice with your practice quiz and use this. And then I want you to go and take your actual quiz using what we just went over in this video. And that should help you. There is nothing new on the quiz. This is everything you're going to see.